And it's really about being mindful, right? Like really being mindful about how you're using money. You know, we've heard this statement so many times, like money isn't good or bad, it's neutral. It's simply a tool. So many of us haven't learned how to use that tool. So it's important for us to begin to learn how to use that tool because it can really build a great foundation and it can really build the life that you want if you use the tool well.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today, we are joined by Walli Miller. Walli, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about this conversation.
Yes, and as are we. Now, let's jump in with the first question that we like to ask everybody and get to know who you are. Who is Walli Miller?
Oh, that question that everybody loves, right? So I am a daughter of an immigrant. I'm a Latina. I am a first generation college graduate. I'm also a first generation millionaire. What I do is I'm also a financial coach. So I help high achieving young professionals. Most of my clients are millennials and Gen Zers who have figured out, okay, I need to get a good job, maybe even have that good job, but don't really know what to do now. So I help people who feel overwhelmed by the thought of budgeting and saving and investing. So they want to really balance living that good life today with what they know they're going to need in the future. And I think my generation in particular, we've sort of bucked the trend of like working 30 to 40 years for the rest of our lives. So I find a lot of people, particularly millennials and Gen Zers, are like, really, is this what my life is going to be, working that 9 to 5 for 30 years? So yeah, that's who I am and what I do.
I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to share with us today. And I think, like you said, right, like teaching people in our age group, okay, you got the money, now what to do with it? Or even you don't necessarily have the money that you plan to be making in the next 5 years, but like, what are you doing with it in the meantime and how to save? So I can't wait to get into this.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned being obviously the first millionaire in your family, first generation millionaire, and also first generation college graduate. So I'm actually curious, what did you study in school?
I actually have a business degree with a minor in law. My thought was that I always knew that I wanted to work in the legal field. And actually, that's what I did. I worked in the legal field for a very long time. And I loved that job. I really found a lot of fulfillment and purpose. I worked in the criminal justice system on the criminal defense side. So I was really helping those people who may have encountered, some troubles with criminal law, right? So I really found a lot of fulfillment there. So my degree has nothing to do with the field that I went into, but the reason why I went and got a business degree was because originally I was a poli-sci major. And with the thought that I'm going to go to law school, but I said, what if I don't go to law school? What in the world am I going to do with a political science degree? And so business and numbers and always interested me. So I thought, you know what, there are many more doors that will be open if I studied business. And so that's what I ended up doing. But eventually I ended up going into the legal field.
Okay. And that I'm assuming that gave you the opportunity to, kind of probably help transition to what you're doing now, but it gave you the opportunity to make some decent money right out of college.
Yeah, sort of. Sort of. So I will say it's really interesting because I think if you study business or even get a degree in finance, one would think that you would learn how to be good with money. And I think that's a misnomer. It's really doesn't happen that way. You might learn how to read a company's balance sheet. You might learn some accounting terms, but when we're thinking about personal finances, it's just beyond the calculations, right? It's beyond the numbers. There's something about learning how to understand your relationship with money, your behaviors, your money money mindset, right? That woo-woo word that is big right now, money mindset. But it's really all of those things. And what is really interesting is that we know today that your money mindset, which simply means your relationship with money, how you behave with money, is set when you're 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So think about that. The people that taught you about money, how you grew up around money, sets the foundation, okay, when you're 7, 8, 9, is basically between the ages of 7 and 10. At that age is when you learn how to deal with money and how to manage money for yourself when you're in your 20s. And so when we think back about perhaps some of the conversations that we overheard as children, perhaps some of them were really healthy conversations, but maybe some of them weren't. Maybe there was a sense of lack, right? Maybe there was, ooh, the lights got shut off, or cable was turned off this month, or you want something as a kid and your parents say, well, money doesn't grow on trees. I don't have money for that, right? So all of these little things begin to shape our relationship with money. And so we either do exactly what our parents did or do the total opposite. So if your parents were extreme savers, very frugal, you might turn into somebody who's like, I don't want to live like that. I want to enjoy my money because I work so hard and I deserve this. Or if your parents were, had sort of an abundant mindset and really spent money on things that perhaps you thought were frivolous, you might do the total opposite and say, oh, wow, that I don't want to be a frivolous spender. So all of these things you would say, well, if you have a business degree or a finance degree, you learn how to deal with money. In some ways, yes, but do you know how to deal with your money? And the answer is no, resoundingly no.
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were saying that, I'm thinking of our 4 kids, right? And we've talked to them about like putting money aside for their long-term savings accounts and all that kind of stuff. And like one does it religiously. Every time every time they get money, it's like some goes into that piggy bank and some goes into the spending. Then you have one who like just saves but doesn't want to put any in the long term. Then you have one that they get money in their hand and it's like gone.
Burns a hole in their pocket. Yeah.
Right. So it's very interesting, all learning the same things, but all totally different. And you say that age group and I'm like, oh boy, hopefully we can make some shifts in the next little while.
Yeah, we got a little bit of landing strip, not a lot though.
Yeah, well, it is one of those things too. Like when we think about it, I don't know about you, but my family, we didn't really have conversations around money, right? Mm-hmm. We didn't talk about money. My parents didn't teach me how to balance a checkbook. They didn't really teach me anything about investing. So we didn't really have conversations around money. And I think that, what you just mentioned is about making sure that you do that, like make sure that they understand how to spend money, how to save money. That's awesome. But I feel like most of us don't learn that. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about what we've learned about money, sometimes it is directly right from our parents. They teach us something. But most of the time is the things that we learn indirectly from them, right? What we're seeing, what we're observing. And what we observe as kids and how we interpret that is what affects us as we get older.
Awesome. Now, the other thing I just actually want to talk to you about is, it seems like when you came out of school and, you started working, just based on what you've said so far, maybe I'm assuming that you weren't the best with the money that you had.
Absolutely not. I mean, when I started off, I went into public interest. I was working for a nonprofit organization, so I wasn't earning a lot of money. And I knew one thing, okay? So I knew how to be very frugal. And so I knew how to stretch $1. And so that wasn't where the problem came. The problem came as that I advanced in my career and began making more money. I paid all my bills on time. And then I said, what do I do with the rest? And I was like, I guess this is the good thing. This is what success means. This means I paid all my bills on time. I'm being responsible. So now I get to have fun and now I get to spend money. And that was what I started doing. I didn't overspend. I never got into credit card debt or anything like that. But any money that was left over, it didn't really have a whole purpose. And my thinking was, this is my go have fun money. You've made it money. Go buy those shoes, go buy those handbags, go out to eat. you are doing really well. And I think sort of my aha moment, I sort of had two of them. One was here in the United States, we have the Social Security Administration. And basically what that does is they take some money out of your paychecks from like that very first, that Social Security tax that you get, from that very first paycheck you make. And I don't know what triggers it, if it's an age or a dollar amount, but I was in my late 20s and I received a statement and it had all of the money that I had ever earned. So that first job when I was 14 to that age, which was maybe 28, 29, something like that. And when I added up the total amount of money that I had made in my lifetime, it was one of those feelings of where did all that money go? I was like, what is going on? Like, and in my mind, I still had some frugal tendencies. So I wasn't buying very expensive clothes. So I wasn't buying $200 pair of jeans. I was buying like those $30, $40 pair of jeans. The problem was that I had too many of those $30 or $40 pair of jeans, right? And it wasn't that I was buying Louis Vuittons. I just had a lot of shoes that I picked up at Marshall's and Ross and all these other things. So in my mind, I was like, but I don't spend a lot of money. But the numbers didn't reflect that, right? When I took a look at how much money I had made over my whole life, it didn't really compute where all that money had gone. And really, if I just looked around, if I had opened up my closet, I knew where all that money had went. And it didn't sit right with me because one of the things that I said was that if my money was a reflection of what I valued, what I was valuing was material things. So that kind of made me pause. Now it just made me pause. It didn't make me change. Now, what did make me change was that I mentioned I have a career that was extremely fulfilling. I love the work that I do. It gives me a lot of purpose until management changed. And one of my favorite supervisors left and we had new management come in. And this very ideal work environment, this job that I love, the people that I loved, I enjoyed working with. When the work environment, my ideal work environment became a toxic work environment, and every day was a chore, and every day I was regretting going to work, and the office morale was low, I realized that I was stuck. I couldn't simply walk away. And it was sort of realizing that even though I didn't realize that I was essentially living paycheck to paycheck, right? Maybe if I missed one paycheck, I would be okay. But if I missed more than one, I was going to be in big trouble. I was going to lose my house, my car, everything that I had worked so hard for, I was going to lose. And that was the change, because I realized that I am doing something wrong. How could I be making this amount of money and still feel financially insecure? And that was when I went to the world of Google to really try to understand what could I be doing and what I needed to do differently.
Yeah. And then I guess with that then falls the budgeting piece, right? I think back even just to our childhood, and I remember my parents did for a while the envelope, where they would have all the envelopes with everything that they had to pay and cash in them. So they like strictly use cash. And if I remember correctly, I think that was some of their like most productive financial years when they did it this way. And I mean, we tried it when we first got married and it makes sense. But I think a lot of people fail when it comes to the budgeting aspect, because it's like, yeah, you can write all you want down, but there's more to it, right? You really have to be on top of it. So where do you see people fail when it comes to budgeting, and how can we change that around?
I think that B word has a lot of, brings up a lot of emotions, right? Because when we think of what a budget is, it can feel and sound restrictive, right? And this is why they say like diets, yeah, they work for the short term, but really if you want to maintain physical wellness and, just be healthy, you really need to do a whole lifestyle change. And I equate the same thing with money, right? I don't like to use the term budgeting. And actually, I don't really budget.
Okay.
As I mentioned before, I'm a natural spender. And so I like to spend money. And so what I created, and one of the things that I help my clients with as a financial coach, is that I help them create spending plans, right? And how is it different? Are we just using different terms? Well, they have some similar concepts. But one of the difference is that when we think about budgeting is, again, a restriction, right? You have $200 for groceries this month, and that is it. When you have a spending plan, it's sort of a living document, right? The way you start the first of the month might be very different than the way the end of the month goes. And so when you create a spending plan, it's really giving every single one of your dollars a job, every cent that you bring in, giving it a job and a purpose. And really, again, asking yourself, does the way I am spending money, is the way that I am planning on spending money align with what I value most? Because again, it's not about deprivation. I want you to enjoy the money. I want you to be able to feel guilt-free. I want you to go on vacation and not worry about those credit card bills and the bank statements that might be sitting in your mailbox. I want you to be able to do the things that you enjoy, but prioritizing those over the things that we tend to spend money on that we don't even value, right? So I had clothes, for example, that I purchased because I thought they were cute, they were nice, they didn't fit well, or when I bought it, it was okay. And I just had clothes sitting in my closet with tags on them. And so I wasn't respecting my money. I wasn't respecting the clothes. I wasn't respecting my space, right? One of the things that I did value was traveling. And so I was like, you know what? Instead of spending this money at Target or Ross or Marshalls or Nordstrom Rack or any department store you can think of, or online shopping, right? I really want to make sure that I am putting money aside so that I could travel. And so when we think about creating a plan for your money, whether or not you do use a budget, which for some people budgeting works, but for me, I want to create a spending plan. I want to know where I can spend my money, and I want to make sure that the way that I'm spending my money is where I'm valuing the things that I value the most.
Yeah, it makes total sense when you say that you respect, oh boy, there were times where, you're speaking to the same type of person. I would just go and shop and then it'd be like, oh my gosh, I haven't worn that. And it's true. It's because, hey, yeah, there was money there, but really when you break it down, are you respecting like your finances even, and also to the time that you put into making this money? So yeah,
absolutely. And one of the things that I started to do was that as I made purchases, I began equating what I was going to spend on my energy and the amount of work output I was going to do, right? Because I mentioned I was in a toxic work environment and I needed to figure out a way out. And I needed to make sure that I had a cushion, I had a runway, so that when I said, okay, peace out, I'm leaving, that I could still pay my bills, that I could still put food on the table, that I could still have a roof over my head. And so when I went to go buy something, I said, okay, this costs 3 hours of work. Is this item worth 3 hours of me being at that job? And sometimes the answer was yes. And sometimes it was no. And it was just that one question of, is this worth 3 hours of my energy at work? Is this worth 5 hours, 10 hours, whatever the thing might be? It really made me just take a step back and really see if what I was purchasing was worth it. And again, I want you to, and I encourage my clients, no one can decide what's important to you. Only you can do that, right? So what I decide to spend money on, some people might be like, I would never buy that, right? But it's really about, what are you willing to exude energy on? And that kind of brings to sort of like what happened next, right? So once I began to really understand where my money was going, because I think just facing the numbers sometime, like really understanding the numbers. I think sometimes when people say, how much money do you make? We think about, we say what our salary is. And it's like, yeah, but that's not how much you're really making. That's not how much you're bringing home. When you take taxes out, when you pay all of your insurances, when you pay everything that needs to be taken out, like how much are you really bringing home? And then the same question is, once you know what your income is, make sure you really know what your expenses are. Because when I did that, and I added up what my true expenses were. I had all this money left over. And I was like, I never have that money left over, right? And that was sort of that moment where I had to say, okay, wait a minute. This is all of my bills. And supposedly I have this amount of money left over. So where's that money going? And that was when I realized that there were some budget leaks. There were some wallet leaks that I was having. And I needed to really figure out what it was that I wanted to do.
I love that, because you actually kind of answered the next question I had, which was really more focusing on the methodology, because you kind of gave the thought process. But no, you really reminded me, especially with the equating the cost of something to the time that you spent earning that money. You know, I did this before I really had a significant amount of income coming in, because again, I'd be out shopping with my kids, and if they wanted something, I'm thinking, no, it took me 3 hours to make that money. I'm not buying you this. Right.
Right.
It really impacts the way you think there. So I guess in terms of what you did with that money now, would it be safe to assume that investing was a part of that thought process? And, one of the things I've learned, I think it was Grant Cardone who said this, yeah, it was definitely Grant Cardone. A bad investment is better than a good spend any day. So what's your thoughts on investing?
Yeah. So when I started to try to figure out how can I get away from this toxic work environment, how can I buy my freedom, right? Like I can't imagine having to work at this job for the next 20 years. Like how can I exit this as soon as possible? I just really started thinking about, well, this could happen at another place, right? Because some people might say, well, just leave that toxic work environment, go find another place. Now, we know it's not always that easy to just get up and leave, right? But I did begin to think about, even if I find another ideal workplace, this could happen again, right? Something else could happen where I may not want to be there. And I just started trying to figure out what was the component that I was missing, because I did save some money, right? I was earning, I paid all of my bills, and I did put some money aside, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to do what I wanted to do. It wasn't enough to buy my freedom. And so when I began to figure out what people were doing, I actually came across this very clickbaity article, and it was titled "Couple in their 40s Retire to Travel the World." And I already mentioned, to me, travel was something that I always enjoyed doing and that I wanted to do. So when I read that article, my first thing was, okay, well, they were probably six-figure tech earners. That's how they were able to do it. And what I realized is that they had a combined income of about $100,000. So they were each making about $50,000, yet they were still able to retire in their 40s. And when I really dug into what they were doing, one thing that I saw was that they were investing money. And that was a huge component that I was missing, right? Because it wasn't about saving your way to early retirement or saving your way to financial independence. It was really about creating enough passive income so that it pays you, right? So that you could walk away. And so when we think about financial independence at its core, it's generating enough passive income, right, through investments so that you have that safety net. And some people will go to real estate, for example, right? Have rental property so that your tenants pay you, and then that's it. That covers your living expenses. Other people will invest in businesses like angel investors or venture capitalists, right? Or even entrepreneurs in some fashion. The other aspect was investing in the stock market. To me, investing in the stock market was gambling. I equated investing in the stock market as gambling, right? And I will say there are some investors who are gamblers, right? There is definitely a speculative way of investing, right? There's speculative investing. But what I realized that investing didn't have to be complicated. It could be very, very simple. This wasn't about getting into Amazon on day one, right? When it joined the stock market and that money grows. It was really about understanding how compound interest works, for example, and how you could double your money without doing anything. And so when I began learning about financial independence, and really it was a money management philosophy, it was a framework that prioritizes building investments. I was prioritizing living that good life. I was prioritizing growing my closet. I was prioritizing traveling. I was prioritizing all these things, where it was like, what I realized, what they did, what this couple and so many other people who were able to retire in their late 30s and 40s, was that they were really prioritizing building investments to such an extent that the passive income generated from the investments could pay them to sustain their life.
Now, in order, I guess, to take the right steps, what would you recommend when somebody gets a paycheck? What's the first thing that you should be doing, or what's the first thing that you should be thinking as soon as you get your hands on those finances?
I love the whole pay yourself first model, right? Now, this is really funny because I was having this conversation with one of my clients recently. She's like, "Oh, I pay myself first. I make sure that I take care of my hair and my nails and I do self-care." And I was like, "Awesome." I said, "You're taking care of present you. But what you have to look about is, are you taking care of 10 years from now? Are you taking care of you when you're older, have some more wrinkles, have whiter hair? Are you taking care of that you?" Right? And so when I talk about pay yourself first, is that generally what we do is we pay the mortgage company, we pay our cell phone bill, we pay the utilities company, we pay all these things first before we even think about saving. So we pay all our bills, then we pay all the things that we want and need, and then whatever's left over is what we save. And if we do that, what generally happens is there's not a whole lot left over to save. And so I want to flip that on its head. Like, let's flip the script. What would it look like is that before the mortgage company even got paid, I separated some money aside for future me. And that, to me, is the definition of paying yourself first. Now, one of the easiest ways to do that is automate it, right? You don't even have to think, you set it up one time and you just automate it. And, a lot of people will come to me because I talk a lot about investments, and they're like, "Well, how do I begin investing?" And really their question is, what's the next best company I should buy? And the first thing I say is, those employer-sponsored accounts you have, right? In Canada, you guys are fantastic because you have the TFSA, you have the RSSP, so there's some really great tools out there that you could use to really begin building that wealth. When we think about our equivalent of a TFSA is the tax-free savings account is a Roth IRA, right? What do you mean there's a way for me to save money tax-free? Like what? And it's like, figure out, understand what those tools are. And look, I just said like an alphabet soup, right? I mentioned the RSSP, the TFSA, the Roth IRA, the 401k, like all of these different things. And this is why people get stuck, because they're like, I don't even know where to start. So the first thing I would say is if you work a corporate job, if you have a 9 to 5, go to your human resource department or a benefits specialist and figure out what company benefits are available to you. Because some of these things may not be just retirement. They may be tuition reimbursement, loan repayment assistance, right? So ask the question, what company benefits are available to me? And that is one of the first places that I would start. If you have something like a company match, if you set aside money for retirement, there are some companies that will give you money for free. This is part of your, I want to take that back, because I said for free. This is actually part of your compensation package that so many people are just leaving on the table, right? They're going to give you 3% match. They're going to match you 3% of your salary. And so many people don't take advantage of this. And this is money that you've earned. This is what you receive as part of being an employee. So take advantage of those.
Mm-hmm. And, you talk about the acronym FIRE. Can we hit on that? And you explain that to us.
Yeah. So if you are not familiar with the term FIRE, it simply means financial independence, retire early. We talked about, when I began in my career, I was like not earning a lot of money, right? But as I began to advance in my career and the more experience I had, and as I moved jobs, I began earning more money. But it's not really about the amount of money you earn. When we think about how quickly can I retire? Or even though I do use the acronym FIRE, really my goal isn't to like sit on a beach with a little umbrella drink and not do anything for the rest of my life. My goal is really to be work optional, to always have that option of whether or not I want to work, right? So that if I find a really great place that I want to work, that I want to spend my time at, it's regardless of how much money I get paid. If I want to do it for 6 months, I'll do it for 6 months. If I want to do it for 3 years and then take a 3-year sabbatical, I'm able to do that. And so when we think about FIRE, it is simply reaching financial independence and then retiring early. I've heard relax early, or retire to entrepreneurship, or retire to through real estate. So it's really about just having enough so that you don't have to depend on anyone. You don't have to depend on an employer for a paycheck.
Okay, so that makes sense. And, we talked before the show started about, sometimes you may not be making your dream amount, let's say, or the max you can on your pay scale, but also still being financially comfortable, I guess you could say, or in a position to save because of the way that you're living, right? So I think before we started, Brian, gave the example of like somebody who's making, just an average minimum wage even, but still all their bills and everything like that still line up. So they're actually still able to save. Whereas somebody who's making a 6-figure income and they're living outside of their means, they're not able to save. Right. So
although I want to challenge that, right? Because it's not really about how much money you make. Now, granted, the more money you make, maybe there might be some more flexibility, but it's really about how much you spend, right? Yeah. It's really about how much money you are saving. Because someone who might be making $50,000 and saves 10% of their income, saving $5,000 a year, guess what? They're much better off than somebody who's making $150,000 and spending $200,000, right? Or even spending every single dollar of what they earn. So when we think about how to reach financial independence, yes, I feel like one of the things that I had to do, and what so many of us need to do, is to really take a look at what our expenses are. Right? Is where we're spending money where we want to spend money and where we need to spend money. The second step is, once you've really gotten clear about where you want to spend money, how you're spending money, and it aligns with what you value, is there a way to earn more money, right? So you can decrease expenses, increase your income. Now, here's the third step that I feel like so many of us miss. This is definitely where I miss. What do you do with what's left over? In my case, I was just spending it. And what I want to share with everybody is that, number one, saving money is great for those short-term goals. What's a short-term goal? For those vacations you want to take, right? Those things, that money that you're going to need in the next 6 months to a year and a half, right? Saving for a down payment on a house. So any money that you're going to need in the next year and a half or less, you want to have that in cash. But any money that you want for that long-term growth, that you want for those long-term goals, investing is going to be key. It really, really is. And so although if you make $100,000, you might say, well, that person is making $100,000, but if their lifestyle and their expenses are $100,000, they can't save anything. And this is where what tends to happen is that the more money we make, the more money we spend, right? It's something called lifestyle creep or lifestyle inflation. As our income increases, we begin to upgrade our car, upgrade our houses, upgrade our lifestyle. And, we say, well, but that's the whole point of life, isn't it? And I'm like, well, you could do that, But if you're doing that, you're equating the amount of money that you spend with that life energy, right? You're basically committing and signing up for another year, 2 years, 10 years of having to work a job that you may not want to work.
Yep. Actually, so for us personally, what we've done over the last, I guess you could say almost 2 years, is that as Brian, his job has changed and he's continued to make more money, we've actually tried to stay on the same income budget and all that kind of stuff, so that lifestyle that you're talking about, it's like, you know what, let's try to keep it there. And, you know, if you want to take some money out, it is there, but to stick with it, especially during COVID, where like I wasn't working all the time, right? So I would have to close down. But guess what? Then the stress, that's limited, because like, okay, we've been doing okay, so we can pull from here. And I think like me, when he first said that, I wasn't really in agreement. I was like, but there's extra, why not? Now I see the benefit to doing it this way. And then there's that optional, the work optional that you talk about, and then it falls into place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love that you shared that, because I think it just becomes sort of normal, right? You know, to upgrade that car, you get a new promotion to sort of upgrade that lifestyle. And that is totally fine. But I think we just forget what we're signing up for, right? What does that mean? That means you're going to have to continue to make that same amount of money in order to afford your lifestyle, right? Whereas if you keep your lifestyle basically the same and you increase that income, now you have much more flexibility. Now you have something called options, right? Like now you give yourself that freedom. And financial security, look, is incredibly important, right? But I want to take my clients beyond just financial survival, just beyond financial security. When I started on my FIRE journey, on the road to financial independence, on really maximizing the money that I was making and making sure that I was investing it, not just for the things that I wanted now, but also the things that I was going to need in the future. It was really about me, right? It was about how can I avoid being in a situation at my workplace where I'm stuck. But as I learned more about investing, then it became about building generational wealth. Then it became about changing a whole family legacy. On Instagram, there's like this meme or like quote that's going around, and it's like, poverty ran through my family until poverty ran into me. And I'm like, yes and amen. I'm totally taking that, right? Like, I want to make sure that I learn not only how to build wealth for myself, but also for the next generation to come. How can I change that? How can I change their relationship with money? How can I shape their relationship with money, right? When we're talking about like young kids and things like that. And so just like doing all of those things about just gaining control of your finances is that first step. And there's so many really great books and podcasts and YouTube channels. But what I have found, particularly during the pandemic, when everything was going down and people whose jobs they thought were secure suddenly became not so secure, right? It wasn't such a sure thing. And I hope that doesn't happen ever again in our lifetime, but hello, who knows, right? We just don't know. It's like, how can we set ourselves up so that it turns from a financial crisis to like a financial inconvenience. Like, oh, I wish this wouldn't have happened, but you know what? I am good. I am taken care of. And then being able to extend that to the people we love.
For sure. I just want to go totally right field and ask you a question. You know, even just with this pandemic, divorce, separation is at an all-time high. So for people who are now finding themselves out of a two income household and now with one income, obviously, you know, things change, maybe house has been sold or what have you. But do you have any suggestions for people who find themselves in that situation now?
Yeah, this is such a great point. I think it's not to be understated, right? Like, this is something that's happening not only during the pandemic, but especially because of the pandemic, right? All of a sudden something happens that you go from a 2-family income or 2 household income to just one. One of the things is exactly what I mentioned before, is really getting clear on what your expenses are and understanding, you know, it's one of those things where we want to plan for the worst, hoping for the best. But think about, before you even purchase that home or go and sign a contract on a lease for an apartment, If you are partnered, if you are depending on somebody else's income to pay half of the bills, what is going to happen if that income was no longer there, right? And that is a very sort of contrary thing that we've been taught. Because it's like, well, you can afford that payment, right? Now, just because you can afford the payment doesn't mean that you can afford the thing. And so it's really important to really sort of think about what your expenses are right now. If you have a really high, one of the things that really you have a really high mortgage payment or a high rent payment, think about, is that necessary right now, right? There might be something that you might need to do. For example, downsizing, right? Maybe moving from a 2,500 square foot home to something that might be a little bit smaller that you might be able to afford, right? Because the worst thing that we could do is avoid the elephant in the room, which is, well, our income has changed, right? If the income is different, then you need to adjust your expenses and not keep the expenses the same way. Now, I will say today more than ever, it's so easy to pick up some extra income, right? So one of the things is we have the gig economy. We have been able to create other sources of income. Like if you are a graphic designer, like Etsy might be the place for you to like make money pretty easily, right? But if you are a parent and you're like, look, I can't pick up another shift, like I have to take care of kids, like trying to figure out some other ways that to use some of the skills that you might have. And so I bring it back to there's two rules of financial independence, right? Is decreasing your expenses and increasing your income. If you can find a way to do that, you can still continue on that journey of financial wellness.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a couple of, you kind of alluded to this a couple of times, but you hit on a really key foundational principle where whether you're talking about money, time, your work, whatever you have, basically, if it's money, you have money left over, you're going to find a way to use that up. Same with your time. If you have a work assignment, you'll see this a lot where, it takes you normally 25 minutes to do it, but you have 2 hours, it's going to end up taking you the 2 hours. So it's also just about being intentional with all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And it's really about being mindful, right? Like really being mindful about how you're using money. We've heard this statement so many times, like money isn't good or bad. It's neutral. It's simply a tool. So many of us haven't learned how to use that tool. So it's important for us to begin to learn how to use that tool because it can really build a great foundation and it can really build the life that you want if you use the tool well.
Awesome. Now, as we start to wrap things up, what are you working on? How can we connect with you? What can you share with us?
Yeah. So once again, thank you so much for having me. I provide financial coaching. So I work with clients one-on-one. Like I said, I do believe that there's some really great books and podcasts and YouTube videos and all these different things, blogs out there. But if you have found yourself with the stack of financial books sitting at your bedside table saying, I'm going to read it next week, I'm going to start reading it next week, or if you've even listened to the podcast and watched the blogs, but you haven't implemented the things, that's who I think financial coaching is for, right? It's about saying, you know what, I don't want to be in the same financial situation 6 months from now or a year from now. I want to learn how to be able to manage my money today. And specifically, even when it comes to investing, that can sound so overwhelming, and it doesn't need to be. Right? Use the simple rules, simple strategies, leverage your current income so that you can build wealth, right? This isn't about day trading. I don't have 6 screens up. I automate the process. And it's really, when we think about even in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, like the stock market was up 20%. It's just like, where in the world? There's no interest rate on a savings account where your money will be able to grow that much. So that isn't because, I picked the best company. It's about just, again, learning how to invest. And I personally like index investing, right? I don't need to decide on what companies. I'm just going to buy all the companies.
Yeah.
I'm just going to buy all the top 500 companies, for example. And so there's some simple ways of doing that. So if you are listening to this and you resonate with that, like, yes, I've been wanting to get my finances right. I just don't know where to start. It feels so overwhelming. I don't know how to do this. We never talked about investing or even that term wealth, right? That was such a foreign word to me. Financial coaching might be something that could really work for you. So yeah, you can just find me on my website. I'm sure all that information will be in the show notes, but it's financiallythriving.com.
Yeah, well, again, thank you for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. Lots of valuable insights here. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that information where we can learn more.
Yeah, thank you once again for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.